just look for a job. And I close by saying, and I know that a number of people involved in politics see this, and this is why I think they have probably a greater duty and responsibility because they understand. We are the ones that go into nearly every single house in Barbados. And the lovely chattel houses that you pass by and see painted in beautiful colors, often when you step through the door, the flooring needs to be done. Some of them don't have any floors. And I really do believe that people in the Caribbean do not have to be as poor as they are, but there are things that we need to change. And I know that while humankind does not like too much reality, I want to say that it is not the job of a government alone. It has to be the job of people like you who profess to be the brightest and the best in Barbados and the Caribbean to take the Caribbean region forward. Thank you.
Control over a certain set of resources, and you could manipulate those, or you could get access to those because they were finite, then your greater access meant less access by others. And so the economics of scarcity emerged from out of that particular economic argument. And so it created a kind of mindset that has governed economics for a number of years. But there's been a major shift over the past 20 years where we've seen a shift in the wealth of nations moving from finite resources to intellectual resources, to knowledge resources, to services. And so what has occurred is that there are now endless possibilities for wealth creation simply because of the facility of the human brain, the human potential at work. And therefore, the limits that were there that governed how a nation was going to seek its economic development, suddenly you have endless possibilities because now you can harvest the human brain, harvest the products of the human mind, and take that and turn that into economic activity. But that begs a particular question. If we're going to be able to harvest what is the potential of the human mind and the human spirit, it says that there must be certain conditions and certain values that govern how human beings go about harvesting this. And one of the challenges for the region as we seek to compete with other nations at the level of our knowledge and intellectual capacity is the cultural value systems that we bring and the behaviors and the perceptions and the assumptions that we bring to life and in how we see ourselves. Having come from a plantation economy, from a plantation background, there's a certain orientation, a way of looking at life that has permeated the way in which we live. For example, in a plantation economy, the whole socialization process built a certain level of uncertainty within the African slave population. They lived with that uncertainty and fear every single day. And therefore, the quest was constantly for survival for the moment, for the now, and to find a place where that sense of uncertainty is not shaken. And therefore, the element of risk-taking would be blunted, living under those conditions for 300 years. The need for harmony as a source of your safety, because harmony between you and your colleagues would help to create the level of safety that you would experience in a day. The level of harmony that could exist between you and an overseer would determine whether you'd be safe for a day. So the cultures of the Caribbean tended to focus on relationship value systems, that we build emotional networks and use emotional networks to conduct business. That's how we get a culture where it is who you know that allows you to advance. And if you don't know anybody, you have a much more difficult time advancing through our social network systems. And so this presents a challenge for us because the new frontiers where the endless possibilities are actually call for that risk-taking. It calls for us being able to believe and be confident within ourselves and not seeking the safety of where the herd is gathering, not seeking the safety of where the numbers are multiplying, but rather stepping to the edge and moving out into those outer boundaries to find those new products, to find those new services, those new ideas that will generate the wealth that we are looking for within the Caribbean. And so bringing a change to how we think about ourselves is going to be critical to our finding those endless possibilities. The second element that is critical is how we do team. While in the Caribbean, we are a relationship culture, and in our teams, we like being nurturing, supportive. We are concentrated on things like harmony, etc., and togetherness, and we draw a lot of emotional strength from out of those interactions. Our team behaviors are not focused on goals and achievement. And hence, our teams have what they're now calling that implementation deficit disorder, because our team systems are focused purely on harmony, integration, support, and nurturing, and are less focused on achievement, driving towards goals, taking things to the next level, thinking outside of the box. And this becomes an inhibitor to our being able to maximize what are some of the endless possibilities there. Now, it does not mean that it is a condition that permeates every single person, nor does it mean that there's a death sentence sitting over us that we will never be able to operate on that big platform and bring out the endless possibilities that are there. What it simply means is that we have to have an awareness of how we function and how we operate, and begin to think through what are some of the changes that need to be made in our mindset to help us to be able to do that. So the first thing for us, grabbing those endless possibilities, is the self and how we think about ourselves, how we relate to each other, how we relate to resources, how we relate to risk, etc. The second thing that becomes important if we're going to be able to grasp the possibilities that are there is how we seek to engage the IT world. And that world gives us a tremendous platform from which to engage and interact with people, interact with ideas, and to be able to collaborate across the world on a wide platform. The challenge that our nations face is that many people use the IT platform primarily for entertainment, or maybe to research a topic, or maybe to shop, or maybe to amuse themselves. Whereas what is going to be necessary if we are going to manage that particular IT platform to really make it work to bring possibilities for Caribbean peoples is for us to help to direct how people engage it so that they use it not only for broadening their knowledge, but for seeking out new ideas, to have their minds stimulated in relation to innovation, to find new people to partner with, and to have that confidence to engage across that platform to do a number of things. And so that is going to be critical if we're going to engage those endless possibilities. But then our societies have to create the structures and the environment that is going to facilitate you as you seek to overcome internal limitations, as you seek to engage that platform. And one of the things that is going to be necessary is that we have to create a favorable climate for success and not create a climate for failure. And if you look at a lot of government policy, if you look at a lot of regulations that govern the various sectors that our people want to operate in, a lot of the regulations can at times be suffocating, especially for enterprises that are new, that are trying to break through into new areas, or that are startups in old areas, that we ask of them that they operate with regulations that are choking. To create a very simple example, here in Barbados, for example, we have daycare centers. We have a dearth of persons providing this particular service, so there's a tremendous need for it. However, you do not have any purpose-built facilities that facilitate people doing daycare, so they often use a home which they rent to execute that business idea. But the problem is that a house is not structured in a way to allow you to lay out that daycare center in a way that meets the requirements of the Child Care Board. But the Child Care Board insists that you have to have 2 feet around each child, and you have to have X amount of people per X number of children, and you have to have X number of bathrooms. So what it does immediately is limits the number of children that that particular enterprise can offer care to. The end result is that daycare providers are unable to earn sufficiently to make it a viable enterprise that they can actually expand the business to meet the regulatory requirements. So it becomes a vicious cycle for daycare providers. So that is what I mean when I say that when you have suffocating regulatory requirements, it is necessary to examine if those regulations are enabling or whether or not we may need to stagger their implementation over the life of a business to give them a chance to lift off before you ask them to comply with certain things. The other thing that is critical, I think, for a favorable environment is if businesses are to have any chance of flourishing, they must have a broad market in which to operate. If you live in the United States with 270 million people and you bring out a product and you are able to sell it to 1% of that population, immediately you are going to be able to sell that to 2.7 million people. And if you're going to make $5 on each item, $13 million, that is a millionaire, just selling to 1% of your population. But take any territory in the Caribbean, and the average size is just over 100,000 persons. If you sell to 1% of that population, you're not making any money. You're talking about less than around 1,000, between 1,000 to 2,000 people, and you can't make money on that. So the economics of numbers is important. So if you're going to create an environment for success, then the sourcing of market opportunities is vital, and this is why CSME is so critical to the formation of new enterprises. Otherwise, your enterprises are going to cannibalize each other and be unable to grow because they're trying to service a finite market that cannot give them the impetus to grow and become successful. And therefore, we have to do something about building the mindset within the Caribbean people that, look, the growth of our enterprises and the generation of employment is going to be limited if we don't access the CARICOM market, and therefore we need to send a strong, strong message to leaders that we have to fix this as a problem. I know my bell has gone, but I just 2 more things, then I will pull out. You have to you have to have a favorable environment for investment. And that climate of investment is important because you have to be able to mobilize the domestic capital in each of the territories to make it available to finance your enterprises. Without the formation of capital to allow that to happen, then you are creating a sense of frustration for your entrepreneurs. You tell them start businesses, bring your ideas, and then you do not have the capital to allow them to flourish. And so therefore it is vital that we create a culture of investment. But a culture of investment means that people have to manage financial institutions well, that you must regulate them properly, that if you allow them to misbehave, if you allow them to mismanage people's funds, you destroy the confidence of people to put their money in those institutions. It is also vital that if you are going to build an environment for investment, it is necessary to train your everyday person that they too can participate in wealth creation, not necessarily because they have a business idea and want to build a business, but they have money that they could invest into an institution that can then facilitate the capitalization of your enterprises. So those are some of the things that are going to be critical if we're going to take advantage of the opportunities that are there. It is what we are thinking about ourselves, how we relate to risk, and what type of environment is created around us to facilitate our being able to seize the endless possibilities.
Pulled together the several issues raised by the preceding presenters. And I would start by asking a question: how do you free yourself from the shackles which Ms. Eastman would have referred to, in a way that allows you to take advantage of the endless possibilities created by access to the globe, given the technological revolution of which we are so familiar? And I think that in looking at the topic, and I suppose standing in front of this podium takes me back a couple decades, when not up this hill, but down the hill in Saurside, I would have stood in front of a class, and as a true teacher, I like to work with what I call working definition, so that we're clear as to what we're talking about. And if we're talking about prosperity, I think we want to think in terms not only of perhaps wealth in the strictest sense, that is dollars and cents, financial independence, that is one element of it. But I also believe that there must be a strong sense of security, a sense of self-actualization. And that is what I believe we should be striving for when we talk about prosperity and we look to explore opportunities, because prosperity for many people may mean different things. It can be a very narrow perspective or a much broader one. In addition to that, and that of course helps you to determine what are the opportunities that you would want to pursue. Thus, for example, we may look to be traditional entrepreneurs or social entrepreneurs. We also want to think in terms of the whole notion of sustainable development, because I think that was part of what we looked at. You're talking perhaps in this world about creating opportunities for yourself and others in a way that allows us to leave this planet in a condition that is capable of supporting generations after us. And therefore, there's a level of concern about the footprint that we leave on this earth. And I think if we start to look at those things, we can ask, how can we be innovative? And there was a suggestion that we perhaps do not, and I wrote it there, you would have seen me writing, we never register patents. I want you, for those who might not have heard the name, to Google the name Professor Raul Hollingsworth. Unfortunately, he passed away earlier this year. He was a contemporary of mine at Cave Hill, and before his death, he would have patented hundreds of products, commercialized many of those. This was a young man from the Bayland, and some of you might know that the Right Honorable Sir Garfield Sobers was also a Bayland boy. But what I'm saying is that there are people out there who have seen the opportunities, who have capitalized on them, who have taken the knowledge that they would have gotten as foundational students here in their first degrees, etc. They looked at the things around them. I can't even start to pronounce some of the things he did. He was a biochemist, among other things, but he was a Barbadian of note globally. And he's only one of many. Earlier this year, you would have seen, for some of you, if you pay attention, we would have had Professor Ward, another Barbadian from MIT, taking young Barbadians through exploring the possibilities of science, applied and otherwise. And so the point I'm making is that as you look at this, you do not think in terms of what you cannot do, but what you can do. What we have to do, however, in looking at that, having identified the context which constrains us, and perhaps having taught strategy for many years and actually introducing entrepreneurship to this campus decades ago, one of the things I often say to people, what sometimes is seen as a weakness, if you flip it on its head, it becomes a strength. And therefore, for example, the concept of team and team behavior explored by Ms. Husbands is sometimes seen as a weakness, but to me, it is seen as a strength as well if we identify it as a potential source of social capital. And what we're looking at when we talk about social capital is the opportunity to build on networks that exist. And as we look to explore opportunities, I want to very quickly speak in practical terms about moving beyond what I call the dependence on governments to create opportunities for us. You would have heard that I've come from a background in the credit union movement. And that is not by accident. That is something that would have probably been instilled in me by my father and my grandfather, who I didn't know. Many of you would have heard of Marcus Garvey. I'm the proud owner of a share certificate of my grandfather who bought shares in the Black Star Liner. And that tells you something about the mentality and the genes that would have been passed on to me. The concept of pooling was something that Marcus Garvey thought about, that we had in friendly societies and that we use in credit unions today and cooperatives generally. And it is what I call the third way, and it is one of the models that I want people to look at. I go to meetings with my counterparts in the region. Only this week I was saying to people, we keep talking about what we need to do in terms of transport in the Caribbean. And I said, if we apply the concept of pooling, in Barbados we have 100,000 plus members of the credit union movement. And I say to people, $1 million is a lot of money, but $1 million is $1,000. And it is something that we have to remember. Recently, there was a family reunion. We heard about St. Philip, and you probably would hear about Red Plastic Bag and the Mason family for those Barbadians and those non-Barbadians who read the newspaper. And there were about 800 of them who were scheduled to come home for a family reunion. And I said to one of them, I said to the same Stepson, Wiltshire, I said, if your 800 people were to put together $1,000, you have almost $1 million. And you can take that and do a whole set of things. Because $1 million startup capital for almost any small business in Barbados is significant. And what the point I'm making is that when we talk about endless possibilities, there are endless possibilities if we come together and work. I want you also to go perhaps and do some research on an entity, and it's probably pretty much a almost government system in Spain. Right now Spain is tottering on the brink of all kinds of things, but I'm sure if you go and do some research, you hear about the Basque region, and it is a separatist region in Spain. Part of it was that I don't know which came first, but the cooperative model was very strong there. It's called the Mondragon system. It started out as a simple cooperative. It has expanded into a whole economy, which provides manufacturing, services, financial, and other. And the kernel, the essential thing there is that concept of pooling. But it requires trust, it requires commitment, it requires a willingness to cooperate. And we see that, but we also see the other side, because if we do not have confidence and trust in ourselves, we will have difficulty trusting others. So I believe that we need to look at using what we have as a means of creating opportunities for ourselves. And this can happen at the level of a simple, what I would call a simple lifestyle operation, or it can be something which has world-class potential. Because one of the leveling factors for us as small economies, as small entrepreneurs or prospective entrepreneurs, persons with limited capital, is that the internet and that technology now opens up instantaneously markets for us. It is easy now to do business with somebody as far away as when I was young and you heard of Timbuktu, you heard of you thought of somewhere far away. When you hear of Timbuktu now, you think of the difficulties that Mali is going through, but the point is, it is simply a fingertip away. And I'm suggesting that we look at those opportunities. And I'll share with you very quickly at least another example. And it came to my mind when a reference was made to the I think it was Mr. Tanis who talked about the issue of a church scene and organ music playing. And in a very real sense, there's a young Barbadian and her Tobagonian husband in New York they have written a screenplay. They have identified some North American actors to play in this. I met them in London earlier this year, and they were on what they call an investor's pitch mission. They went to London to meet wealthy British people who own homes in Barbados, who traveled to Barbados, because it was felt that they could invest in this production. It is called Once Upon an Isle, and it's a story about a young organist who is playing for a celebrity wedding, and the scene is in St. James Parish Church. If you don't know, you should venture there. It's probably one of the oldest, the first Anglican church in Barbados, beautiful, whatever. And that is exactly how you can create something out of an experience that they probably had, a memory that she might have had as a youngster going to church there. I don't know what would have triggered the desire to write the play. But she was talking to these persons, and I said to her, it would be an unfortunate situation if you have this film made and Barbadians do not have an opportunity to invest. And I said to the same thing. I said a couple million, because it's seen as a low budget film, is only $4 or so million, and in the context of North America, that's a low budget film. But you are able to attract known actresses. Many of you might have seen Soul Food. You might have read about Vanessa Williams, not Miss America, the other one, who would have been here because she has agreed that she likes the script, she wants to play the part, she happens to like Barbados. But I said to her, they're Barbadians with money, some with more than others. You need to come to Barbados to undertake the same kind of exercise. It was trying to get it done because you had to convince certain institutions, as you would have heard from his husbands, you get through the red tape. But she came to Barbados and was able to successfully present her project. And I believe that come by the first quarter of next year, we should probably see that film produced. Now, the question is, some people might have said to her as a young student, why are you wasting your time as a Barbados scholar going into film? And that is something that parents, I can speak to it. My son might not like me to speak about it, but we were going through, and I reconciled myself to it last week when he said to me, I really don't want to do management studies. I want to do film. And my first instinct was, what you going to do with that? And then I said, but hell no, you can't do that. You taught people about entrepreneurship. What you need to say to him is, here are the possibilities of a career in film, and so on. And I sent him an email and I said, proceed. I have reconciled myself to it. I am supposed to be entrepreneurial, not only in conceptually, but in practice. I stepped out of this institution in 1999 and went and said to myself, if I can't do what I told my students to do, then I should not be teaching my students. And so I would want to say to you that as we look at this, we also need to explore the opportunities that exist, not in the traditional tracks that with which we're familiar, that is whether it's academic, business, whether it's financing, whether it's the actual creative idea that you want to flesh out. But you need to, one, believe in yourself, but beyond believing in yourself, I think that there's strength in community. There is therefore my approach to this, and I've seen it work very well in this country, in the region, that pooling of resources, whether it's intellectual resources, whether it's financial resources, or other kinds of resources, can generate opportunities which far outweigh the constraints that we see. I will end by suggesting that I take this message not only to this kind of forum. One of my first responses when I sat in a meeting of CARICOM was that for years, and you heard how long ago I graduated from KFL, for years I heard in the days of Burnham and so on talking about the region feeding itself, etc. And the first question I asked was, if I planted all the food I wanted in Guyana or Suriname or Belize, and I don't have transportation, how are we going to deal with it? How are we going to move it? But we keep talking about that as a problem. My solution is that there are models out there which we can use. We in Barbados operate a Bridgetown Cruise Terminal, which is a joint venture between the government, private sector, large corporations, when I say private sector, and individual shareholders like myself. It is a model that can be replicated. I mentioned the credit union movement. The philosophy of the movement is cooperation among cooperatives. And across the Caribbean, we have been cooperating among ourselves. If you go and do some analysis, you would find that the credit union movement in the region has been able to mobilize significant resources. I do not subscribe to the notion that we should target them for investments that will consume the resources, but I'm saying that it is a potential source of partial financing of a lot of the solutions in the region. And one of those things I believe is the creation of an entity which can finance maritime transport to do a number of things. Move people around the region, but more importantly, move food around the region. We would have seen what happened in the US yesterday and the day before. And before that, before the floods, we had drought. Think about what that means for our food security. And I could go on, but I'm not here to give a lecture. I used to teach for 3 hours at a stretch. So having said that, I think that I should have probably whet your appetite for an approach to solving some of the problems that we have in terms of exploring and capitalizing, and ultimately, well, I set it up for you, sir, the question and answer by hitting something. The opportunities to address the needs of our region. And this is a message, incidentally,